And we'll start with item 1, apologies. Now I have an apology from the Mayor and I have an apology from Councillor Johansson, who may join us later, but just depending on timing. So an apology either for absence or late arrival from Councillor Johansson. I've got an apology for an early departure from Councillor East. Yep. All right, so an apology for partial absence or early departure from Councillor Templeton. No other apologies? All right, that's great. So I'm happy to move those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Mike Davidson, thank you very much. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Declarations of interest. We have a number of declarations of interest which are noted on the paper. If any declarations come up during the course of the meeting which have not been taken into account in item 2, please make them known at that time. So now we come to item 3, the Metropolitan Strengthening Communities Fund. So just to make some introductory comments, staff have worked on a number of applications which have been through a council workshop. The recommendations coming to this meeting are a combination of those staff recommendations amended with guidance and input from that councillors' workshop. So that's the basis of the meeting today. Our role today is to consider any amendments, and a number have been signalled, and then come to a final recommendation which will be voted on and at the end of this meeting approved, and that's what will be implemented by staff. So Nicola, welcome to the table. It might be good for us to take some comment from staff on this, if there is any comment, and then we'll move to any general questions, and then we'll move into considering any amendments to the recommendation that's in front of us. So Nicola, if you've got any general comments that you wanted to make at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. For those of you who haven't met, my name is Nicola Thompson and I'm the team leader of the community funding team here at Council. My team has been responsible for the oversight and process behind the applications that you have before you today. The huge task of assessing these applications has been undertaken by the advisors you see sitting in the seats behind me. The purpose of the Strengthening Communities Fund is to support community-focused organisations whose projects contribute to the strengthening of community wellbeing in Christchurch. Successful organisations are those who demonstrate that they are sustainable, strategic, community-focused groups who have a significant presence in their community of benefit. All applications to the fund must demonstrate sound governance, appropriate financial management and good reporting practices. They must have the operational capability and capacity to deliver the outcomes that is agreed. I'm pleased to be presenting this report to you for your consideration of the 2018-19 Metropolitan Strengthening Communities Fund. To support this process, we've provided for your information the Council outcomes and priorities, the Strengthening Communities Fund criteria, and a decision matrix document which outlines the requests being sought from the fund. The matrix details the applicant grants requests, their core organisation details, staff assessment and grant recommendation. All applications presented to you today have gone through a process of assessment, firstly by individual advisors, followed by a collective review at a staff collaboration meeting. All of the applications have been assessed as either a priority 1, 2, 3 or 4. Priority 1 applications are those that we consider contribute significantly to funding outcomes and priorities, and are applications that we have recommended to fund well. Priority 2 applications contribute to funding outcomes and priorities, but not as closely as those that are priority 1. These are applications we are recommending making a contribution towards. Priority 3 applications are not recommended for funding. To use some funding speak, these are applications that if we had all the money in the world, we would like to make a contribution towards, but unfortunately we can't. Priority 4 applications are also not recommended for funding. They are assessed to have a minimum contribution to funding outcomes and priorities, or they may have insufficient information provided to make an assessment, that is after their application is considered and further requests for information have been made, or it may be that other sources of funding are considered more appropriate. In total, we have 190 Metropolitan applications with requests totalling over $8 million. There were no ineligible applications received to the fund this year. Staff are recommending 12 applications for funding for 2-year funding, and these are highlighted for you in pink on your spreadsheets. The total budget available for all 190 applications to be considered today is $3,164,789. Staff have made recommendations totalling $3,153,374. As you will see on the spreadsheet that we will be projecting up for you, a change has been made to the balance available. There is now $5,001 available as we had a late withdrawal of an applicant. The budget, the spreadsheet in front of you will also help you keep track of your decisions as you move through the process today. So our staff are here to support you, to answer any questions you may have, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. So at this point, I'm happy to take any general questions, so not questions on specific applications, which Nicola will be able to answer. So Sarah, first of all.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The first, you commented that those priority 3 ones, if we had all the money in the world, but actually they meet all our funding criteria currently, and it wouldn't need necessarily all the funding in the world, but just some, if we had more council funding available, we would choose to fund some of those because they do contribute to all of the outcomes that we're looking for.
Yes, yes,
right.
we would.
Thank you.
Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. One general question. I sent an email to you and John Fassel regarding to the, within the multicultural sectors, compare this coming year and the previous year, which project or projects has been reduced for 25% and above. But I got a reply from you, maybe take a week, no resources. But let's only focus on the multicultural sector rather than whole project. I just don't know what's the rationale cannot get this information.
So Jimmy, I'm going to ask John Filsell to respond to that question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Look, thank you, Jimmy. We got the requests, and each request we provided as much information as we possibly could. We did make it clear that the reason we couldn't provide the rest would be the time and resource taken to do that, and we also gave a few points on the relevance of the information that you were asking for. So the reason we couldn't do it is, one, the very short notice. The one request came in essentially this morning, and the rest was the other one was a couple of days ago. We've done what we can, but we can't do any more in the time frame, and we sought to give you some information back on the value and the relevance of all of the information you were asking for. So we haven't got that information and we can't provide it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Phil, Glenn, and then back to Sarah. Phil.
Thanks, Nicola. Can you just give us an indication, like where a group is withdrawn, like it has for this round? What are you able to tell us? What sort of priority of funding they had been eligible for?
I believe.
I couldn't find it.
I believe that one was actually a priority 3 initially under staff recommendation, but that 5,000 was proposed.
That answers that. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you, Nicola, for the, pointing out how much was applied for, how much is available, and I asked last time, could we see some kind of graph over how that fund has tracked in the last few years? Is that still possible?
Yes, it is. We have done some analysis of that, but I don't have a lot of figures. What we have found, though, is that the overall amount that is allocated for all of strengthening communities, not just Metropolitan, has remained the same since I think it was 2010. In 2010, the budget was 10.2 million. At that time, it was dropped to 7.2, and it has been around that for the whole time. Any differences in what is available for allocation at this level for Metropolitan funds is usually around if we've granted multi-year funding, if there's any other funding that we've had to take off the top of that.
Oh, thank you. And that's useful to know, probably an annual plan considerations. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you. I note that last year when we came to this, we also had applications for some of these organisations being considered by the Community Resilience Partnership Fund. And we're currently not doing that for some of these applications. We're also not looking at the Capital Endowment Fund, which we had allowed the inflation adjustment to be used for community purposes, and there's hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in there. So why are we not looking at those other funds for some of this when we're quite stretched?
At the staff collaboration, there was, the staff looked at all of the applications, and there was actually, I'm going to say one, but there was possibly two that we directed to the Resilience Fund, as we thought it would be most appropriate. So we did look at that. We haven't looked at that in terms of the Capital Endowment Fund.
So are those organisations currently still in our grid?
No.
So they've been taken out completely? Yeah, and have we already decided to fund those, or are they still going to come to us?
They're still going to come to you via the Resilience Fund, but a conversation was had with the groups.
Yeah.
And they actually ended up withdrawing their applications from this fund and reconsidering what they were going to do and make an application to the Resilience Fund.
Okay. And if we had organisations, do we have organisations in here that would meet the funding for, say, the Capital Endowment Fund? So I know that in the long-term plan there was a resolution potentially around SCAPE that would potentially meet those, and could or should that be looked at?
Can I ask for a point of
sorry,
clarification?
I'm going to allow the question. I'm going to allow the question.
So, capital endowment funding was specifically set aside for community purposes, and we have that funding available. And are there organisations in here which we could potentially have funded through that instead of strengthening communities?
Do you want to?
Would you mind if I...
Yeah, that would be good. We did cover this at the workshop.
Yeah. Look, firstly, the Chair's reminded me we did cover this at the workshop. Yeah. Secondly, Sorry,
if John, at the workshop, more information was going to come to us so that we could work a process for doing that.
Yeah. The Capital Endowment Fund operates. There's an application that's put to it and considered by the council on its own merits. So if there was, after this strengthening communities allocation process, an organisation that felt that it wished to make an application to the Capital Endowment Fund, they're very welcome to do that through our funding team. So a broad brush call at this point in time, before the fund's been allocated, on whether that's an option yet, probably can't make, but certainly arising from this, an organisation could feel that it should take this course of action. One thing that we are very conscious of is the council have approved a set of money to be allocated through this process, and we would like to follow that out and get your assistance in doing that.
So arising from that is the fact that staff have already gone through a process where they've said, well, actually there's two that might suit the Community Resilience Partnership Fund, and so actually we're not bringing them to council. We've talked to those organisations. Did we consider doing a process that was similar with any organisations here for the Capital Endowment Fund, where those organisations were offered the opportunity to go through that fund as well
Yep.
instead of here, because then that might have allowed us space for some of those other organisations to be funded.
No, we didn't, and the reason that we didn't do that at the time was the staff that the fund opened in last financial year, and all of these recommendations and decision-making matrices were done before council had made changes to the capital endowment fund, so we didn't go through that process.
And, you know, the staff recommendations were what they were coming to the workshop, taking into account those things that staff, and I mean, John, you've made some comments on this, felt were appropriate to take into account at that time in the environment that they were working in at that time. At the workshop, yes, you know, the issue, Sarah, that you've raised today was raised at that time, and we've had some further information on that now. I've got a number of amendments that people have signalled that we're going to consider at the meeting this afternoon, and none of those at this stage is referring any application to the Capital Endowment Fund. So that would be the way to deal with this if that's what you were wanting to do.
So just one last thing. Organisations that do get funding today, are they eligible and would they meet criteria to apply for additional funding through the Capital Endowment Fund?
Yes.
Or where they could get additional funding through the Capital Endowment?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. So now I've got Tim and Phil, and I'm reasonably keen to move on to deal with some of these amendments. Tim.
Just a clarification. Before the question was asked about the amount, and you were saying in 2010 available that it was reduced from 10 to or around 10 million to 7.2 or something. Was that right? So, following the earthquake, so it hasn't changed from that 7.2. Could we also get an idea of the increase in groups that have been asking for funding? Because there's a two-way thing here. One is the amount that we've had, and it's been reduced prior to the earthquake, and the amount of need, because we've got groups like, you know, Gap Filler and others that have been created from that, who are also going into that funding pool who have never been there before. So
we
that,
can certainly get you the exact figures for those, but anecdotally what we've seen in our analysis is that the number of applications that we're getting remain pretty steady, because for all the new groups that we do get groups that don't apply every year, have applied for a couple of years and then drop off. So it has been relatively steady in the amount of applications that we receive.
Oh, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. And then finally, Phil.
No, actually, John answered the question.
So you're happy? That's fine.
Thank you.
That's great. All right, so if we can now move on from general questions. I've got a number of amendments that have been signalled, and what I'm going to do is take the amendments in the order in which they were signalled. So there has been the opportunity since the workshop for councillors through a process to signal those by email, and a number have been raised verbally since that time as well. So I'm going to take the amendments in the order in which they've been signalled, which means that the first amendment that we'll deal with is an amendment from David East. What I'm going to do is to get each person moving an amendment to get a seconder. At that point, just a very brief introduction, a kind of no more than 2-minute introduction as to the purpose of the amendment and what's intended. Then there'll be the opportunity to ask questions to staff if required, and then we'll debate if required and take a vote on each amendment. I'm keen to keep this as short and concise a process as it can be, given that this has already been through a workshop, so any amendments really are just changes further as a result of further considerations, or in Dave's case, because he wasn't at the workshop. So Dave, excuse me, Andrew. Sorry, just one. All right, so apparently what we need to do is to get the staff report moved and seconded before we go into the amendments. So Tim is happy to move that. Dion is happy to second it. So if we can then take a vote on that? No? So just moved and seconded? All right, so moved and seconded, so that's the staff report. So now we're taking amendments. So Dave, I'll come to you for the first amendment, and if you can detail the application number, speak to it briefly, and then we'll run through the process I described.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we're looking at item 178, and apologies that I wasn't able to be here for the
earlier workshop. I'm putting forward this application because I feel that in the city it's one that resonates quite well with the aspirations of this fund, and it caters specifically for access to the beach for disabled people in all forms of disability, in providing a mat where they can access the beach with a wheelchair, walking sticks, crutches, all sorts of things. And there was a trial last year with a fairly narrow mat. It was quite coarse. It was extremely successful, and I think I'm very keen to see this this application be funded to a degree, and I'm proposing that the $5,001 be applied to this this application, and I believe Sarah Templeton's happy to second it.
Okay, so this amendment's moved by David East, seconded by Sarah Templeton, and we've captured the amendment.
A few technical issues here. Oh dear.
Okay, so the amendment is to add $5,001
to
to
178.
178, taking that from the balance which we have got on the spreadsheet as described in the opening comments. So moved and seconded. Is there any debate on this? All right, so I'll take a vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? So that one's carried. Thank you. Okay, so next I'll come to an amendment that's been signalled by Pauline Cotter and seconded by Phil Clearwater. Pauline.
Yeah, so thanks, Dion. I would like to move that the grant for Keep Christchurch Beautiful, which you'll find on page 127, is increased by 10,000. You note that number? To 20,000 altogether. Their original application and what they have been receiving for a few years from the council has been 30,000, and that's mainly for the administrator's salary. Now, to receive 10 is a considerable decrease, and I think their projects will be at risk. I think this group fits in with a lot of the council's activities and our strategic directions. They're working directly with the community and keeping our city clean and our waterways, and also with 35 to 40 schools. They've got great programs. I think that if we can get them up to 20,000 again, that's a reduction of 30% of what they've historically been receiving. So I think I have a seconder.
Yep, Phil Clearwater would indicate that he would second this. Thank you. Are there any questions for staff on this one? Jamie.
Are we operating with a sort of you add money in, you need to find where to take it from?
So Pauline's suggestion as to where the money comes from?
Oh, yes, thank you. I don't know if you were at the workshop? No. Okay, so what we did is we made some small adjustments to the staff recommendations at the workshop. We shaved some of the pink ones off by a couple of % across the board. I think we exempted a couple there, didn't we? The Ferry Mead, the Orchestra, and another one. So I'm suggesting we shave it from that group.
So you're suggesting, Pauline, that the funding, the $10,000 that you're wanting to add to Keep Christchurch Beautiful, be taken proportionately from a number of the major organisations?
Yes.
Is that all of the major organisations or just some?
That's
so all the purple,
yes,
highlighted ones?
All of them except the Showbiz, Christchurch Symphony, Ferry Mead, and Orana Park.
So what percentage is that of them?
So I would have actually plumped for the 5,000 that was surplus, but it's a pretty strange process, so that's gone, just through the luck of the draw. I think if we were to sit here and go through all the other recommendations and start picking them to pieces, we would be here for a very, very, very long time, and we may not even get resolution. So this to me is the easiest way, that if these amendments, providing they don't add up to an enormous figure, and they may not, it would be a tiny bit of those ones, and I think that's the easiest way to go forward.
About 3% of those.
I'm looking at Keep Christchurch Beautiful as potentially falling over. The money that they have listed in the report is for the slow drawdown of her salary, the lady that is the administrator, and once that's gone, that'll be the end of them. They're quite a strong group. They're getting stronger, and they have really good branding and identity under a national umbrella, and I think we'd be doing very well to support this group and partner with them to help achieve our own goals. So I'm looking for reducing them by only 30%, not 75%.
All right, so the amendment's clear. Are there any further questions for staff on this, Glenn?
Yes. So could we just please be clear on the organisations which aren't excluded? In other words, those from which the money is coming.
Yep.
Yep. So can we do that now?
So it's all of the major organisations, with the exception of Showbiz, the Symphony Orchestra, Ferrymead and Arana Park.
Okay.
So that's the amendment. Phil.
Okay.
Can I speak to the...
Yep, once we're done with questions, then we'll move to debate. No further questions? Jamie?
Are staff going to write that up? Because, I don't think anyone's doubting, the quality of the debate or the argument for that. It's just, I guess, more a procedural thing that would be really good to see exactly what that percentage is, and in dollar terms what that means for those organisations which are having some of their funding shaved off. And if that's up there, then we can sort of move forward.
So what might be quite good is to get them all, and then Jan, just...
Community House.
It's coming off the court. Community House.
Yep, so Community House, Mayor's Welfare Fund, New Zealand Trust, which are trying to start in New Zealand, Christchurch.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
All right, so John's in a position to give an indicative... I mean, given that this is a dynamic environment, it's difficult to come up with exact numbers, but John is able to give an indicative amount, which hopefully Jamie will go some way to asking the question that you've answering the question that you've asked. John?
It's about 3%. Sorry? 3%. Yep.
So if all of the amendments that are going to be put this afternoon... Yeah. If all of the amendments that have signalled are going to be put this afternoon were to be carried, the effect on the major organisations, indicatively, would be around 3%.
Oh, sorry, Andrew, that's just for that one individually.
Just this one?
Yeah. Yeah.
That one is 3% to get $10,000. Yeah.
Off one, which are our
organisations
priority
that are
ones,
affected.
the most
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
of our important ones for something that's a
Which have already been shaved.
priority. Two.
Okay. Mike?
Just to confirm, we've already shaved off 3%
From the staff recommendation, correct?
Okay. And so it would be good, before we start doing these individually, to realise the impact, because every single amendment now is going to be wanting to shave off money from these major organisations. So, yeah, I think we just need to be a little bit careful how we proceed.
Yeah, I mean, given the sentiment that you're hearing around the room, Pauline, is there something else that you're comfortable with putting this amendment the way that you're crafting it?
The thing is, if we'd had time at the workshop, I would have had more time to actually get this through the original. When we agreed to that, I feel like that we were very rushed the other day. I don't think it's particularly fair, and the fact that $5,000 is allocated originally to the person whose amendment was pulled out of the hat first is not...
Well, no, I took the amendments in the order that they were signalled. The amendment that we took first was the only amendment that had come by email prior to the informal discussion that occurred prior to this meeting, where the person who had sent the email was also present at that meeting. So I'm taking the amendments in the order that they've been signalled, starting with emails that were received according to the process that was outlined previously.
Go into debate whether that's the strongest process as well. So my question, actually, could I ask staff a question?
Of course. Of course.
That if this organisation does not get an increase, are they then able to go to the Capital Endowment Fund?
Yes, they would be able to.
They would be able to.
Yes.
They would qualify?
They would be able to make an application. Depends on what their application is for. We would take that in itself.
So, I don't know. I'm not really getting a feeling that there's a lot of support for this around the table. So I'm wondering whether perhaps we should try. I don't know what the process from here is to amend the amount. If that would help.
Yeah, I mean, you may want to just put the amendment that you put. Yeah, you've got an amendment which you've moved and it's got a seconder.
Would you? Yeah. Yeah, so take it down by another 2,500.
So it's 17.5.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So the amendment is 17,500 from the major organisations that have been signalled. Pauline, you've spoken to it. Are there any further questions? Dave?
Yeah, we sort of heard that at 5,000 it was going to impact by 3% on all major organisations. You've got a number of other signalled amendments. If they were all approved, what would be the overall shave of the major organisations? I mean,
that was the number he gave us for all of the amendments.
Yeah, he said 3%, but that was just for this particular application.
That was 3% off all of the organisations. The amendment proposed by Councillor Cotter excluded a number of those organisations, thus the residual percentage is higher for the ones that are left.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we've got an amendment which has been moved and seconded. Is there any debate on this? Phil?
Look, I also want to support this. I think it's well known that Keep Christchurch Beautiful have been the umbrella organisation for a whole lot of clean-up parts of our city for a long time. And I think we owe it to them not to cut the leading coordinator's salary and in effect that kind of thing, to cut to the chase. I just think that, you know, so much has developed with KCB being the umbrella that we can, as a city, can be proud of. And I think it's not a good time to actually make a reduction. So that's why I'm very supportive of the reduced amendment that that Pauline has put forward.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you. And, you know, I agree with both Pauline and Phil, but I can't support the amendment because I could say exactly the same thing for almost every organisation in that list. We cut them all last year, we've cut them all again this year, and I can't support doing that for one organisation over another organisation that is just as valuable in our city. I'm sorry.
Glenn?
Thank you. When I disagree with this, when I look at the organisations proposed at which the cut would come, I can speak about one of them and not the other, but they both relate to the community sector, and we've just had the four well-beings, you know, they're going to be restored. This runs against that, and I don't see why you would cut funding, for instance, from Christchurch Community House, and so it's on those grounds that, you know, I'm going to vote against this.
Thank you. Tim, and then I'll come back to you, Pauline, at the end as the mover.
You know, thank you. I do agree with what Sarah's saying. Every one of these organisations, as the staff said, and especially the threes, where if we had the money, we would be giving them to them, and their staff would be recommending that. But you know, the other side of this is when we talk about shaving and shaving off the ones in pink, they are large organisations generally who do really, really good work. And if you look at the amount that the projects are costing that they are undertaking, the amount that they are requesting, but the amount that is recommended and seems at this moment to be given, are hugely different to what they've requested. So we keep shaving off these guys. It does hurt them. So that hurts these guys as much as everybody or anybody else, whether it's size or is taken into account. Everything is important. So I'll be voting against this amendment.
Thank you. Okay, Pauline, back to you, and then we'll take a vote.
Yeah, and look, it's really hard, and we'd all love to give everyone, even the ones with zero money, as Nicola's saying, it is hard. I just come back to the fact that to reduce an organisation by 75% with the stroke of a pen, with no warning, and that organisation to potentially and probably will cease, I know they'll be determined to look around for money, but it does put a lot of strain there, and you know everybody is tight. All the other organisations are tight for money too. I just think that's very harsh from this council when we'd be better to support these people and actually work with them and help them to help us to deliver our own strategic goals, which is cleaning up the city. How many times do we sit around here listening to councillors complaining about the state of the city? These people are actually grassroots doing it. And yes, the big organisations are really, really important, and I'd like to give them all way more as well. But I think the small grassroots organisations, this one's running on $30,000 a year and a ton of volunteer hours, and this administrator does a ton more work than she actually is paid for. So it's that kind of gold you've got there, and I think these are equally worth supporting as well. So there'll be, even if my amendment does pass, and I do hope it does, they're being reduced by probably around 35% to 40% now. So I think we need to bear that in mind, that we need to really look after these grassroots people. So I do hope that you support this.
All right, so I'll put the vote. All those in favour say aye. 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 Against? No. Can I have a show of hands for the ayes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's lost. Okay, moving on to the next one. Canterbury Resettlement Resource Centre. So, Jimmy, this is yours. I've got a note that it's moved by you, Jimmy, seconded by Anne. Could you speak to it briefly, and then we'll take questions? Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. This is Canterbury Refugee Resettlement and Resource Centre, because I tried to move the increase from the original 15K to the 20K, increase the 5K, because I reviewed all those funding, the history, and also their workload at the moment, so I suggest 5K more. You are all aware, you know, the mayor working together with the Minister of Immigration, the announced last Saturday, particularly emphasized Christchurch as a city of refugee resettlement center again since the 2011 earthquake. And also the council, we have launched the multicultural strategy for almost 1 year. I review the funding, the granting, all those one, before we launch this one, and after we launch this one, particular focus on the multicultural sector, not any increase, the funding, still the same funding. And we compare those ratio. At the moment, 25% is in relation to the multicultural group, but funding is only around 10% only. The other ones we can assume, you know, after announced this kind of the Christchurch as city of refugee resettlement center, the workload for this group will be increased significantly. So that if we drop the 25%, because 20K you drop 5K, you know, then how they can make that happen? Last year, previous year, always 20K. So that's my recommendation.
All right, thank you. So this is moved by Jimmy and seconded by Anne. And the source of the additional funding, so what we're looking at here, hang on, what have we got in front of us here?
workshop it was, a percentage of major organisations.
Yeah.
All majors, and that's about point.
Organisations you wanting to take the funding from proportionately across the stable of all?
But I was told by my fellow council, they're pretty concerned, showbiz, symphony, fairy May, you know, and also around park. So this 5K, I deduct all those one, maybe 0.5% can meet the needs. I just want to know whether, John, you can estimate how much if exclude these 4 projects.
So your proposal, Jimmy, is potentially to exclude the 4 projects that you've just named?
Yeah.
Okay, we need a firm amendment as to where the funds are coming from.
Maybe the staff can give us the recommendation.
Well, no, maybe you can move an amendment which has got a clear recommendation as part. That's what we need. I mean, if you need some staff advice in order to determine that, that may be what you're about to get. But we need a firm amendment so that people can choose whether to vote on it or not. So, all right, John's just working on an answer. Yeah, John's just working on an answer. Is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, so Tim will take your questions and then John will provide the advice that Jimmy's asked for.
Thank you. With regards to resettlement of refugees, etc., what part does the government pay financially with regards to that? Or is it all on the council to fund these sorts of these groups?
I'm sorry, but I'm not able to answer that question at the moment. The advisor that did this assessment is not here, and we don't know why. So unfortunately, there's not enough information that we have in the matrix to be able to answer that.
Okay, and that would be, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that would be the same then for the Christchurch Resettlement Services, which is going to, I'm presuming, going to be coming next, which Jimmy put up before.
Yes, she did that assessment
Okay,
as
thank you.
well. Sorry.
There's a difference.
All right, thank you. Thank you. John's got an answer now to the question, Jimmy, that you asked, and then we need to really pin down what your amendment is.
So John, how much you will deduct those 4 projects? How much?
It's going to be just under 2%.
Okay, so it's on the organisation wanting to take the funds off, if you exclude the 4, would be just under 2%.
Under 2%? Why assume just 0.5%? Why would it be different?
Because you're excluding...
You can accumulate 87,000, then you plus the 145,000, then you plus the 77,000, then you plus the 110,000. That almost is...
Jimmy, we're doing maths on the fly here, but you have to understand that the organisations with the biggest proposed allocations are excluded. For example, Showbiz, Arana Park, the Christchurch Symphony Trust, so the amount that you've got left to take the money from is less.
Yeah, so it's entirely up to you as you craft this amendment, whether you want to exclude those organisations or whether you don't.
Because those figures, this problem, you need to calculate. Because Pauline Pewis one, he recommends increase of $12,000. Then you mentioned is
3%.
Only 3%.
And yours
but
is
it's only 5,000. 5,000 you divided 12. How much? Just
we included Arana Park in the...
Just 1%.
I'll do these figures again.
Okay.
I don't see any point in this.
Okay, let's just get a check on the answer that we've received.
Yep.
But the answer will be the answer, the maths will be the maths, and then we need to get a firm proposal that we can then debate and take a vote on. We need to appreciate that John, staff are doing work on the fly this afternoon in the face of changes that have been made after a workshop where we'd already pinned quite a lot of this down.
request was 5,000.
Yep, so the increase is 5,000.
Maybe 1.2 from my brain.
Sorry, I get 1.2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same as
yeah. So I got 1.8 last time. It's
So
1.2%.
All right, good.
Get my one right.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
0.2.
So Jimmy, now that
Yeah.
we've got the answer to that question,
Yes.
what's the amendment that you're proposing?
The proposal is from the increase 5K.
Yep,
Increase 5K.
and the funds are coming from,
Funds coming from, I mentioned to you.
with
earlier.
those exceptions?
Yeah, all those,
Okay,
yeah.
yep. All right, so that's the proposal.
Yeah,
It's
that's.
moved and seconded. Are there any questions for staff on this? Phil? No? Is there any debate on this? Phil?
Look, it's unfortunate that the multicultural advisor isn't able to be here, but I just see in the report that in fact this is for the number 50, the refugee resettlement. There is a comment that in fact central government funding isn't attached to the clients who are going there. So I just wanted to comment on that. I also think that that this is a particularly important group, refugee and migrants. One of the reports here does indicate, and I think it's unfortunate this wasn't picked up at the workshop, but it's quite clear in the report that in fact there was a proposal or for the refugee and migrant quota coming to Christchurch, and some of us were at the celebration last Saturday. And so, as is indicated in the report too, a refugee population are going to need a lot of support. It's easy to say that central government should be paying for this. We could say that actually about every application here, but I haven't heard that opposition to some, and I think it's important that we keep vulnerable groups in mind and the assistance that has been offered. Both Refugee Resettlement Resource Centre and the Resettlement Services have done outstanding work in terms of supporting very vulnerable people. And I'm really concerned that in fact we not give this full consideration, and I ask councillors accordingly to do so, including for the next item 62.
Mike and then Glenn. Mike.
Thank you. I will not be supporting this amendment, and it's nothing to do with the application. It's very worthwhile, but very similar to the last one, and it'll probably be the same for the rest. I thought I'd just speak once to an amendment and then speak again if I actually will be supporting. We've already shaved off quite a bit from the major organisations, and for some reason we keep targeting them, and it's just not the right thing to do. We went through a workshop, we worked it all out, and there was plenty of time in those workshops to discuss things. It was not rushed, it was talked through very well. So I will not be supporting this amendment.
Thank you. Glenn.
Thank you. I can't support it. There's a slight element of a bit of a Pyrrhic victory in some of these, because if you support this, it comes at the price of, e.g., one of the groups that's not excluded, being the Christchurch Community House. So it's kind of, one, in supporting it and doing that, it kind of serves to, undermine the other. So we might, several of us find ourselves in this situation. Just can't go with it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the nature of amendments of the type we're dealing with today been put after the workshop and in the situation that we're now in. So, I mean, there will be a number of people will take a particular position on these, and it's been indicated because of the fact that these have come after the process that really was intended to resolve the issue that we're dealing with today. Okay, Jamie.
My debate on this is actually going to be a bit along the lines of what Glenn's just said, and also Mike, and it's going to be said once because I'm going to take a similar line for any other amendments. Look, Newton's third law is with each action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and it's very similar in this case because the opposite reaction, as Mike has said, and also Glenn is taking funding off the major organisations. And we need to remind ourselves that these major organisations are the ones that are priority one, as in the most important of the important ones here. So continually taking...
If I can let the debate continue, thank you.
Thanks, Phil. You could close your eyes and point your finger on any number or any application in here, and no one would be able to say that they don't do good work and that if you could fund them, you would. That's not the issue here. The issue is that we've gone through a process that's been workshopped. There's staff recommendation here, and look, we rely on our staff heavily for a lot of things, for technical things. You wouldn't query the design of sewage station or sewage pumps or anything like this. And to be perfectly honest, I actually take a tremendous amount of guidance from staff through this process, because they know these organisations intimately, and they are so passionate about what they do, and they do a really good job. So I don't take any pleasure in doing this, but I just think that we have these major organisations here that are priority one. We've gone through a staff process, we've gone through a governance process around a workshop, and I think then just continually then punish the priority ones, or the ones that staff have deemed to be the top priority for other ones that do good things is just not a good process. So I won't be able to support that, and I think we need to have a line in the sand, and you don't take any pleasure in doing it, but I just think that it's good governance, and good governance isn't always fun or handing out lollies.
Thank you. Any further debate? Pauline.
Could I ask the mover if he would be happy with 2,000?
2,000.
It's all right, just a simple yes.
3,000.
No, this is a question's been asked. Do you want to give an answer?
I would like to emphasize this is a priority one. And also I mentioned earlier, the moment we can assume their workload will be more and more heavy. And also over the last 3 years, they request a 70.
Okay, so Jimmy, you've moved an amendment, and it's been introduced. Pauline's now asked you whether you'd be willing to vary the amount in your amendment. Are you willing to do that or not?
But I'm still insist on 5K.
Okay, thank you.
5K, yes.
All right. So is there any further debate on this? Okay, I'll put the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Show of hands. Yeah. Those in favour? Show hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's a loss. So that one is lost. Okay, next one, 62, Christchurch Resettlement Service. Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this one I cannot say it's similar to the previous one, but this one is more kind of crucial and important, because while that particular perspective help those the refugee and their family the mental problem, and also to help them to promote the well-being and resilience, etc. And also we review the past 3 years, so even more, because I request giving those information. Every year we're going to funding for them is 40K, and also we are all aware they done the excellent job, particularly for those the mental problem. This long-term kind of need to be the treatment to help those refugees and their family one. And also the moment the government announced this Christchurch as the city of the refugee resettlement the center, their workload will be more and more the heavy. This probably after the couple of months they have 20 the refugee family will come next year, another 40, 60, and also in the future probably at least up to the 100 the refugee will come to this city. This is probably one of few the refugee agency, probably one, to do this kind of mental problem, etc. So I suggest, but because our funding is very restricted, at least they cut for 37.5%. I request 5K can reduce those only the 25%. Because of previous 3 years 40K. increase the 5K up to the 30K. But still, if that's true, still we reduce the 25% for them, 5K.
So you're proposing to add 5,000
Yeah.
on the same basis as
Same
the previous
place,
one,
yeah, same place.
with the same exclusions?
Last one is the lowest, yes.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this one?
1.2%.
Is there any debate on this one? Phil?
Look, I'm strongly supporting this as well. While most of us were at the workshop and believed we understood it, I actually believe we didn't really, there was no clarification at all that in fact the refugee settlement was likely to change by the end of this year. And since that workshop, it has changed. And I think in fairness, we really need to support this. That information wasn't here. And I will add, not everyone was at the workshop, and I understand that. But you know, one of these programs is for women to be able to have their from other ethnic origins to be able to have their own swimming, and that's part of their culture. I really think that we need to support these minority groups, and I ask councillors to do so.
Thank you. Any further debate? Glenn?
I think the problem I'm finding, Jimmy, is the exclusions. So if they were changed, I wouldn't see it as kind of one step forward, one back. If you look at, for instance, if you took them from the arts sector, my vote might be different. It's gone up, arts have gone up a whole percentage from what was requested to recommended last time, and they still have quite a big chunk of the overall pie. So, you know, if that was changed, it'd probably get my support. But the exclusions you have now, which are the same as last time, I just can't go with.
Thank you. All right, so we've got an amendment which has been moved and seconded. We've had questions, it's been debated. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? No. Show of hands for the ayes, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's also lost. Thank you. And then the final amendment, which has been signalled prior to the meeting, is 107. Glenn, this one is yours, and indication of a seconder by Dion.
Okay, I'm proposing for this another 2,000 with 500 to come off each of operatic, symphony, opera and the court in the major organisations.
So from all of the major organisations?
No, these specific ones, operatic, symphony, opera and court.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Are there any questions on this proposal? Any debate on this proposal? I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. That's lost.
Okay.
So that's all the amendments that have been signalled prior to the meeting. Is there anything else that anybody would like to move at this point? Sarah?
I'd just like to gauge appetite for a potential amendment. I'm not actually going to move it yet, if that's okay with you.
Yep, sure. Yep. I'm happy to do that.
It's clear that there are organisations which people would like to support further, and not with large amounts of money. So there is the potential in this process for us to do what was signalled in our long-term plan resolutions, which is to specifically take out one of these applications and put it to the Capital Endowment Fund. We are clear that we don't need to be waiting the 6 months that has been done in the original Capital Endowment Fund resolutions, because they have been coming to us ad hoc and we waive the process. So I was wondering if there was appetite, being that we would be the decision makers on that particular application anyway, to move what people are currently comfortable with, which was the $40,000 for SCAPE, which we do want to give them, to the Capital Endowment Fund and have that come quickly, which would open up $40,000, which in the amendment could go to organisations which we have signalled we would like additional funding for. So that is it's canvassing the room. It would depend, we'd maybe get advice on how quickly that application could come, because we do want to fund SCAPE. It's clear none of us have moved to get rid of the funding for SCAPE. We really want to fund this organisation, but it's one that got signalled in the Mayor's recommendations for potential capital endowment funding, depending on how this process went. So I'm just gauging appetite
All
at
right.
this point, Andrew.
Are there any questions that you wanted, Sarah, are there any questions that you wanted to ask of staff in order just to inform the appetite a little bit
So
better?
it would be the how quickly could we get that process done? I know that during the long-term plan process, we got through, Mary's not here, we had one done within 3 days, one application that was done specifically for long-term plan capital endowment funding for Enviro schools was done within a couple of days. So whether one could come to the next meeting.
So I think, that's certainly one of the questions, how quickly could it happen? The other question that I would have, and I'll add it now as well, just so that we can get John to comment on both, is what the likelihood of something meeting criteria for Capital Endowment Fund would be as well, just so that we can get some comment on that. So John, if you want to speak to this in a general sense, addressing the two questions that have been asked.
The two are intrinsically linked because the nature of the application from SCAPE, and it would have to be an application from SCAPE that was received by us that we put forward to you guys, they would have to trip the switches. So to engage SCAPE, get a valid application, go through the due diligence, just strategic alignment, but most of the time is financial. We don't want to be recommending poor decisions. I would say that you'd be in a position to make a final decision in just under a month.
Can I just follow up on that? So during the long-term plan process, the Enviro schools program came to us, and there wasn't a full application from them to the long-term plan, but staff were able to do an assessment without further engagement with them, or maybe just a couple of phone calls. And get that to us. So I mean, and other things, we have just simply referred the current applications rather than getting a whole new application from an organisation. And is that possible too? We could just refer this application in a resolution to the Capital Endowment Fund.
We wouldn't want to refer an application directly to the Capital Endowment Fund if we didn't.
We've done that in the past.
Because that means...
Okay, let's get the answer from John.
Yeah, it's just gauging appetite. If people are just happy doing what we're doing, it's fine. I'm happy to fund them, absolutely.
All right, let's get the answer to the question from John, and then we'll gauge appetite, unless there are further questions. So, John.
The process to get a successful result will be to engage with SCAPE to get an application that will succeed and has all the information there for councillors to make a decision on the fund. Then we go through the financial analysis. We put it into a meeting schedule, and we jump it as quickly as possible. So my answer was up to a month. If it can be 3 weeks, we would certainly aim to do that. I'd hate to create an expectation that we end up with egg on our face. So if it can be done sooner, we would. We just want to do a good job. It's a lot of money and it's a valuable fund. We want to do it well. If it takes less time, look, we certainly would.
All right, so what I don't want is to get into debate on this. What Sarah's asked is for a gauge of the appetite of the meeting, and then if there was an appetite for it, I'm guessing, Sarah, you would move it and you would have a seconder, and then we would debate it. So those who do have an appetite for what Sarah is proposing, if you could please raise your hands.
Just make that wording clear. What is it you actually are?
So if I was going to move something, it would be along the lines of either referring the SCAPE application to the Capital Endowment Fund, or staff working with SCAPE to apply to the Capital Endowment Fund, and that would then allow that $40,000 to be used for the organisations, which we have indicated today we would like additional funding for.
But do keep...
All right, we're not debating it. All I want is just what we're really saying is there an appetite for Sarah to move that as an amendment, so that is there likely to be support for
What
it?
allow is $40,000 additional funding for strengthening communities. Yeah.
No, I think it's...
All right, so is there an appetite for that, or is there not? So those that do have an appetite for it, if you could please raise your hands. So there isn't support. No. All right, so I'd now call for any further amendments, and there are none. So we've now got the report moved and seconded from the beginning of the meeting. That resolution has now been amended by any of the amendments that we have dealt with that have passed. So we've now got a final resolution from this meeting which is capable of being voted on. Is there any debate on this substantive motion? Mike?
Thank you, Andrew. Last year at the 2017 Metropolitan funding meeting, we realised then that the amount of funding was not enough to fill the needs of the many organisations and groups that provide valuable services to Christchurch. As a result, we made the following resolution: support in principle raising the amount of community funding available for grant allocations by 10% in the long-term plan financial year 18-19, and then inflation adjusted each year after that. Unfortunately, that did not happen at the recent LTP. In fact, at the end of the next 10 years, the annual amount is less than today. So here we are right now with a funding budget that does not even get close to meeting the needs of what we have in front of us. This continual flatlining of this fund is hurting these groups who are doing their best for the city while they see their costs continue to rise. While I was supporting this, we need to do better.
Phil?
I don't disagree with that. I've got no doubt somehow that we need to do better around this funding, and I guess we have the council funding review underway for that very purpose. But part of that too, I think, should be how in fact all of the applications, and I think the funding review committee needs to refer to this, how in fact they will meet our community outcomes and objectives and what we want to achieve. And so that in fact our funding is more targeted, and that then that we have a conversation with the community about that, so in fact that becomes clear. Because I guess there will always be a limit to the funding that we can find, but I'm certainly agreeing with Councillor Davidson that we need to find more, especially at this time after, in terms of the psychosocial issues that our community have.
Thank you. Jimmy?
Thank you. Yeah. As a councillor, we play a governance role. Although the staff give us the kind of reference information, however, between today, the funding, the decision making the meeting, and also the workshop, you are aware, during the workshop, several hours, we review all those information, quite comprehensive information. We raised some of the questions, issues. However, because just within the several days, even up to today, I still not yet to get the information. So I'm concerned those decision making, whether it's high quality. So I suggest next year, between the workshop and also the final meeting, should be at least a couple of weeks until staff, to give us all those information. We make the decision. There's more kind of highly reliable. So I'm concerned that this time, actually, several issues probably we play the role. We are much familiar with the staff. This is my concern.
Thank you. Tim?
Look, first of all, I want to thank the staff. I think, us around this table, the politicians have found it hard to do, to try and work out how we can support those groups which we feel are really important to our communities over other groups that are also important to our communities. So as hard as it was for us, I can only imagine how hard it is for you working with those groups face to face. So I really applaud you for the work that you've done and the good information and the passion that you provide. So thank you very much. Following on from what Councillor Davidson said, I think there are some areas that we've got to look at in this organisation, and a dollar is a dollar wherever you put it, and we've got to find some areas, and if there are areas that we can move. I've got one in mind which I'll talk offline maybe next Tuesday with, which I was a great supporter of. Recently there's some bit of information that came through which could be said as great. I think it's a more disconnection from our community, and I'd be more than happy to pull the funding from that and put it into this in our communities where it is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne?
I welcome the funding review that's in process at the moment, because I think we've got some really big issues here we need to address. We're all very uncomfortable with this process and not happy with the fact that we are having to do this bidding war against community groups against community group when we know everybody needs the money. I'd really like to recommend that our community advisors be involved in the funding review. They've got their feet on the ground, they know exactly what's happening out there. It would be very good to have their advice and experience in this discussion. And I'd also like to the challenge I think is giving money doesn't always mean a better outcome. yeah, it does ensure a better income. But in Hamilton, for example, with the street begging situation, $1 million, 17 staff on the ground doing that, they still haven't solved the problem. In Christchurch here, we've got a fantastic partnership happening that actually hasn't involved much more money, but it has involved working together and actually bringing resources that are already out there together. So I think we need to really look at this whole issue in a very creative way, and I look forward to that funding review.
Thank you. Dion.
I just wanted to echo what Tim said and say thank you to all the staff for the amazing work that you have done. I can't imagine how, you know, when we're discussing it here, that, you know, you guys are talking to these applicants, and you're going to have to go back to some of those people and sort of give them the news that they're not going to get what they needed in some cases to survive. And I just wanted to sort of also say, you know, echo kind of what Councillor Galloway is saying, is a number of the organisations that I know, not necessarily the ones here, are all facing challenges in funding, and most of them are facing challenges in funding because of the increased costs, the constantly increasing in costs in terms of the regulations and complying with different things, and health and safety acts and all those kind of things that are always on top. And the burden of that is all coming down to what we're seeing now, and it's really not good, actually. I mean, it's ridiculous when you want to hold a street party that, you know, that might cost $500, but you've got to get a $20,000 traffic management plan. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And all these things are, you know, these are compounding on our communities, and the actual money that goes into our communities is less. So I think even if we put more money from the council, it still probably is going to end up as less money actually on the ground in our communities. So I think all of us, you know, especially us around the table here as governors, need to think, how can we do this differently that actually means money that we're putting into these community organisations ends up on the ground? Because there's no point in giving more money and it just goes into another business that's actually taking another chunk of the money for another compliance cost on top of it, on top of. It's just unsustainable and ridiculous. But again, thank you very much, everybody out there who's done the work. Please pass on our thanks to your teams as well, because it's a collective work, and the money that is going out today will make a difference to our community. So thank you.
Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. I wish to acknowledge staff and colleagues. Obviously, it's a challenging situation, and we can end up in effectively a bidding war, and it can, you know, pit you against colleagues, but also against yourself. So, in my previous life, I came from that ethos of sorry, Phil, I'm talking of, you know, caring for the orphan and the refugee. I'm faced today with, do I choose between refugees or Men's Welfare Fund, which I can't vote on, or Christchurch Community House? That's a hell of a situation to be put in, quite frankly. I don't want to get in that situation again. So I just want to say, look, can we try and not so much just workshop the amounts, but workshop the process ahead? So we all have different and similar value systems, you know, mine, yours, some similar, some different, but I think there's got to be a way that we aren't actually put in you know, what I think are these invidious situations.
Pauline.
Yeah, look, yeah, following on from that, I don't think there is an easy way to do this, and I totally support what Glenn's just said. And you do get into a bidding war, but partly that's what it's about. The staff put their hard work into it, and you know, no one wants that job in Africa. But and then we put a political lens on it from our gut feeling with our communities, and we all do have a bidding war because we've all got those different areas of interest. So in a way, it's been quite a balanced process, I think, in that view. So just want to echo the sentiments of gratitude to the staff for all the work too. Thank you. And yeah, so we're here, and not all of us are happy, but this is the decision we've made, and we have to stand by it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenging process. It's a challenging set of decisions to make. I think regardless of what process you ran to get to it, it would be challenging. I always find these meetings difficult and challenging to chair, because of course you have got exactly the balancing act and exactly the conflicts which have been described so well by a number of people around this table this afternoon, and it is very difficult to balance the effects of work done by so many different groups, many of them volunteer groups across so many different sectors, all of which have got good outcomes, and it's very difficult to balance one set of outcomes against another when you're looking at, you know, quite different outcomes across different sectors. And I think one of the things that comes out of this for me is the huge amount of work which is done by a large number of organisations in our communities, all of which is valuable. And of course, what we've got to do in these meetings in a constrained funding environment is to decide which of those is more worthy of funding than the other, or which of those is more valuable to our communities than the other. And it's a near impossible set of decisions to make. The funding review has been referred to. And my hope is that that funding review will result in a more strategic approach to the way that we make funding decisions, a more joined up process with other funders in the city, and quite possibly a more joined up process around where government funding is both available and appropriate as well, so that we get the best value from the amount of funding that we are putting into our communities. I'd also like to echo the thanks to staff. I'm aware of the huge amount of work that's done before we get to the staff recommendations. I'm also very aware of and very appreciative of the work that's done often in a very reactive way to sometimes unexpected proposals that come out in the workshop and meetings like this one. And I'd like to thank John, Nicola and the people that are in the room and your colleagues for supporting us so well in the decision making that, you know, we've already alluded to has been quite difficult, and without the support that you provide it would be even more difficult than we found it. So thank you very much indeed for both the preparation and the reactive work that you've undertaken as part of these meetings and in preparation for them. We've arrived at a set of recommendations. That's what we're going to be making a decision on in just a moment. I think it's fair to say through this process we're never going to be able to keep everybody absolutely happy, but you know, certainly there has been some good consideration and debate both through the workshop and through this meeting today. And as has already been said, the decision that we're about to make is the result of that process. It is what it is, and we know that the funding that goes out to the community organisations that we are funding will be well used and will deliver good results. There's no question about that from the conversations that we've had as we've gone through the process. Sarah. Dave. Okay, so Dave and then Sarah.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo the sentiments re the staff input to this process. I'd also like to, and it's been a bit of a hobby horse of mine for a few years, that we have successively over a number of years now reduced our level of strengthening communities funding, and as the pressure on a number of our community groups has increased as a consequence. I think the Chairman also alluded a moment ago to being collaborative in our approach going forward when we are talking about a funding review, of talking to our the other funders in the city and others. But also I think, you know, we need to look at the other prime source of funding in our city is the gaming industry, and we as a council have this sinking lid policy. So on the one hand we are reducing our own funding to the community, on the next we are reducing the availability of funding out of gaming machines, and the other trusts and organisations around the country and the city are finding increasing pressures on their funding. So we need to think, when we're doing this funding review, a very holistic approach across all sectors of funding in our community, and that's something I'll certainly be advocating when that comes around.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. This has been a difficult and at times fraught meeting. There are so many fantastic organisations and applications. They have hundreds of volunteers and tens of thousands of hours of work in our communities. They meet all the criteria for funding, contribute to the social and environmental wellbeing and vibrancy of our city, and are all deserving of our support. Council processes mean that if we decline any for funding, they're not able to apply to the community board. and we've not made use of the other funding opportunities available to us, which we specifically resolved funding to be available for. And we chose this. Jamie said earlier in this meeting, if we could fund this, we would. And you know what? We could have. Councillor Scandra and others have thanked staff and drew attention to the very tough job that they have had to do. And I do too. But we are the ones who have made their job harder by not giving them the resources needed to fulfil the needs of our communities. We went through this exact same thing last year, and you decided unanimously that increasing the level of funding available would be an excellent idea. We resolved to add 10% unanimously, and yet a few months later we decided that supporting our community groups to build social capital, resilience and cultural vibrancy wasn't as important as, for example, providing grants to private heritage building owners. Councillor Galloway drew attention to the funding review, and we established it at this very meeting this time last year. It is this funding review that will bring the strategic and political lens that Councillors Cotter and Turner mentioned. Councillor Livingston found it hard to choose between refugee services, the Mayor's Welfare Fund and Community House, and we shouldn't have to. I did consider putting a new amendment to the meeting to increase our community funding, but past experience has shown that while we are willing, the carry-through simply isn't there.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much indeed, and once again just echoing our thanks to staff for all the work that you've put into this, and I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.